In 1858, the night Marielle Beaufort slipped off a Missouri plantation, 3 white bounty hunters were already carving her name into their capture log. By sunrise, they had her shoe print measured, her blood on a torn branch, and a price so high that slave traders were preparing a cage before she was even found. Yet the Keaton brothers miscalculated one detail. The direction she ran placed her directly across the path of a free black gunslinger whose bullet trails were rumored to redraw the rules of the South. By the end of that week, the Keaton's hounds were dead. Their camp was abandoned in panic, and their eldest brother's body was found positioned in a way no ordinary fugitive could have managed. What did that gunslinger do when he stepped between Marielle and the men who thought they owned her fate? And why did the hunter's final moments look nothing like a chase, and everything like a warning? Before we go any further, comment where in the world you are watching from and make sure to subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you don't want to miss. Dawn crept over Beaufort Plantation like a fever dream, slow, gray, and unwelcome. I sat on the floor of my workshed, back pressed against rough wood, the stolen ledger spread across my lap. My fingers trembled as I turned each page, the candlelight making shadows dance across columns of numbers and names. Names I knew. Children I'd watched grow from infants into workers barely tall enough to reach the cotton bolls. Ruth Henley, age 9. Value, $600. My sister's name stared back at me in Master Beaufort's tight, slanted handwriting. The entry sat near the bottom of a long list. 15 children total, all scheduled for auction in Memphis come September. The notes beside Ruth's name said she'd fetch a premium price. Small fingers, good for delicate work, as though she were nothing more than a tool to be traded. As though 9 years of her laughter, her soft voice singing hymns in the quarters, her trust in me to keep her safe, as though none of that mattered at all. I traced the ink with one fingertip, careful not to smudge it. The ledger held more than just sales records. Master Beaufort had documented everything: payments to state legislators, shipments of rifles hidden in cotton bales, bribes to sheriffs who looked the other way when overseers beat people to death, names of plantation owners across Tennessee, Missouri, and Arkansas, all connected in a network that bought and sold human beings like livestock, while funding political campaigns that promised to expand slavery westward. My stomach turned. I'd found the ledger by accident the night before, tucked behind loose boards in Master Beaufort's study, while I'd been summoned to repair a torn curtain. He'd been drinking with his son, Thomas, discussing the upcoming election. Thomas needed money for his campaign. Lots of money. And the only asset worth liquidating quickly was the plantation's children. "They're young enough to train for new buyers," Thomas had said, voice slurred with bourbon. "Won't remember this place in a year." Master Beaufort had laughed. "Sentiment is expensive, boy. Politics costs more." I'd worked on that curtain with my head down, invisible as always, but I'd listened. And when they'd left the room to smoke cigars on the veranda, I'd found their accounting of our lives hidden in plain sight. Now, as pale light began filtering through gaps in the shed's walls, I knew what I had to do. I couldn't let them sell Ruth. I couldn't let them profit from this nightmare. I had to run. My hands moved quickly, folding the ledger into a tight rectangle. I wrapped it in oilcloth salvaged from sewing scraps, then bound it with twine. The package fit snugly against my ribs, tucked beneath my shift, and secured with strips of cloth tied around my torso. It pressed against my skin with every breath, a constant reminder of the evidence I carried. I packed light: a spare shift, a tin cup, a stub of candle, strips of dried meat I'd been saving for Ruth's birthday. Everything fit into a canvas sack small enough to sling across my back. My heart hammered as I blew out the candle and cracked open the shed door. The morning fog hung thick and low, turning the plantation into a ghost world. I could barely see the big house 50 yards away, just a dark shape looming through the mist. The overseer's cabin sat to the east, still quiet. No one moved in the quarters yet. Dawn bell wouldn't ring for another 20 minutes, but I needed more than time. I needed chaos. As if summoned by my desperation, I heard wagon wheels crunching on gravel. A trader, early, unexpected. His voice carried through the fog, loud and jovial, greeting the overseer who'd stumbled from his cabin half-dressed and annoyed. They argued about payment schedules and delivery routes, their voices rising. I didn't wait. I slipped from the shed and moved low, staying close to the hen house, then the smokehouse, then the tree line. The fog swallowed me whole. Behind me, the trader's argument grew louder, pulling attention toward the front of the property. My bare feet found soft earth, then grass, then the blessed cover of underbrush. I ran. The hours blurred together, branches whipping my face, roots catching my feet, terror driving me deeper into the woods. I followed deer trails when I could find them, stuck to hard ground when I couldn't, always moving northeast toward the Tennessee River. The ledger pressed against my ribs like a heartbeat made of paper and ink. By mid-afternoon, I heard the first shouts behind me. They'd discovered my absence. The overseer's voice carried through the trees, bellowing orders. Then came a sound that turned my blood to ice. Dogs baying in the distance. The Keaton brothers had been summoned. Everyone in the quarters knew their names. 3 men who hunted fugitives with military precision, using trained hounds and an intimate knowledge of every escape route through the borderlands. They didn't just capture runaways, they broke them first, returned them as warnings. I pushed harder, legs burning, lungs screaming. Dusk found me stumbling into a clearing where an abandoned smokehouse sagged against the coming night. Its roof had partially collapsed, but 3 walls still stood, and the door hung askew on rusted hinges. I dragged myself inside and fell against the far wall, gasping. My dress was torn in a dozen places. Scratches covered my arms and legs, some bleeding, others just angry red lines. My feet ached. My throat burned with thirst. But I was alive. I forced myself to move. Rotting crates sat stacked in one corner, old storage containers left behind by whoever had abandoned this place. I dragged them to the door, wedging them against the frame. It wouldn't stop anyone determined, but it might buy me seconds, maybe a minute. I sank down behind the barricade, pulled my knees to my chest, and let my head fall back against the wall. Ruth's face filled my mind, her gap-toothed smile. The way she braided cornrows so tight they lasted a week. How she'd curl against me at night, whispering questions about freedom. Whether it was real, whether we'd ever see it. Guilt clawed at my chest. I'd left her, left everyone, run like a coward, while they remained trapped in that hell. But if I died in these woods, Ruth would be sold anyway. If I let the Keatons drag me back, the ledger would be destroyed, and nothing would change. The network would continue, the sales would proceed. Children would vanish into the machinery of commerce and cruelty. I had to survive, had to get this evidence to someone who could use it, had to matter. In the distance, hounds began barking, a rhythmic, eager sound that meant they'd caught my scent. The Keaton brothers were closing in. I pressed my hand against the ledger hidden beneath my clothes and made myself a promise. They could kill me, but they wouldn't take this. They wouldn't erase what I'd seen. They wouldn't silence what I knew. I would fight. The barking grew louder, closer. I pressed my back against the smokehouse wall and forced myself to breathe slowly, quietly, even as panic clawed at my throat. Through gaps in the warped wood, I could see torchlight flickering between trees, 3 separate flames moving in a coordinated pattern. The Keaton brothers worked like wolves, spreading out to cut off escape routes before closing in for the kill. I had minutes, maybe less. My eyes adjusted to the dim interior, and I scanned the cluttered space with desperate focus. The smokehouse hadn't been used in years. Whoever owned this land had either died or abandoned it. Broken shelves lined the walls, their contents scattered across the dirt floor. Old tobacco jars, some still sealed. Chunks of tallow that had hardened into waxy lumps. Rusted hooks hanging from ceiling beams. A pile of burlap sacks rotting in the corner. The dogs hit the door. Their claws scraped against wood. Bodies slamming into the barricade I'd built. The rotting crates groaned, but held. One hound's muzzle forced through a gap near the bottom, teeth snapping at empty air. Saliva dripped onto the threshold. A voice cut through the chaos, deep, controlled, southern. "She's in there." Got the door blocked. The eldest Keaton brother. I'd heard stories about him, about how he'd once tracked a fugitive for 3 weeks, dragging the man back more dead than alive just to prove a point. "Want us to smoke her out?" Another voice, younger. "Not yet. Check for other exits. Don't want her slipping through while we're focused on the front." Footsteps circled the structure. They'd find the rear window soon, the one with the broken shutter hanging by a single hinge. When they did, I'd be trapped. Unless I gave them something else to worry about. I grabbed a tobacco jar and twisted the lid. The seal broke with a soft pop. Inside, dried leaves had turned to powder over years of neglect. I dumped the contents and reached for the tallow chunks, cramming them into the jar until it was half full. My fingers worked fast, tearing strips from the burlap sacks and stuffing them into the tallow, creating makeshift wicks. I made 3 jars, 3 small bombs. The dogs kept hammering the door. The barricade wouldn't last much longer. I positioned the first jar near the entrance, wedging it between crates where the dogs' bodies would hit it when they broke through. The second went near the center of the room, placed on a shelf at chest height. The third I kept in my hand. Then I pulled out my candle stub and the flint I'd stolen from the plantation kitchen. My hands shook as I struck the flint. Once, twice, a spark caught, and the candle flared to life. "Found the window!" The younger Keaton's voice came from the rear of the building. "Shutter's broken. She could have already—" I touched the candle flame to the first jar's wick. The tallow-soaked burlap caught instantly, fire racing up the fabric. I didn't wait to watch. I lit the second jar, then grabbed the third, and sprinted toward the rear window just as the first explosion hit. The tobacco jar shattered with a sound like a gunshot, tallow spraying across the door and igniting in a whoosh of flame. The dogs yelped and scrambled backward, their handlers shouting. Heat washed over my back as the second jar went up, filling the smokehouse with choking black smoke. I threw myself through the rear window. Glass that had already been broken cut at my arms, but I barely felt it. I hit the ground hard, rolled, and came up running. Behind me, the third jar slipped from my grip and tumbled back through the window into the inferno I'd created. The explosion lit up the night. Flames erupted through the smokehouse roof, and I heard men cursing, dogs howling in pain or fear. Someone screamed orders about water, about containing the fire, about not letting it spread to the dry forest. I didn't look back. I ran into the darkness with everything I had. Legs pumping, lungs burning, branches whipping my face. The ledger pressed against my ribs like a talisman. Behind me, the chaos I'd created bought precious minutes. The Keatons would have to control the dogs, assess their injuries, regroup. Minutes were all I needed. The forest swallowed me whole. I ran until my legs threatened to give out, until the sounds of pursuit faded to nothing, until the fire's glow disappeared behind layers of trees. Only then did I slow to a fast walk, gasping for air. Night had fallen completely. The moon hung low and heavy, casting silver light through the canopy. I used it to navigate, always moving northeast, always putting distance between myself and the hunters. My body wanted to stop, wanted to collapse and surrender to exhaustion, but my mind wouldn't allow it. Every time I thought about resting, I saw Ruth's name in that ledger, saw the price assigned to her life, saw the future those men had planned for her. I kept walking. Hours passed. The forest thinned into rolling hills dotted with oak trees. I found a creek cutting through a shallow ravine and waded into the cold water without hesitation. The current tugged at my legs, but I pushed upstream, letting the water carry away my scent. If the Keatons managed to get their dogs under control, this would slow them down, maybe throw them off entirely. I stayed in the creek for nearly a mile, ignoring the numbness spreading through my feet, ignoring the way my teeth chattered. When I finally climbed out, I was so cold I could barely feel my fingers, but I was alive. The land rose gradually, and I crested a low hill just as the moon reached its peak. Below, in a small clearing, I saw the silhouette of a structure, a homestead, or what remained of one. The main building had burned. Blackened timbers jutted from the foundation like broken ribs. The chimney still stood, dark stone against darker sky. A smaller outbuilding sat intact to one side, though its door hung open. I approached slowly, every sense alert. No lights, no smoke, no sounds except wind moving through grass. The homestead was abandoned, but whether it was truly empty, whether someone or something waited inside that outbuilding, I couldn't tell from this distance. I moved down the hill with careful steps, keeping low, watching the shadows for movement. The ruins looked worse up close. What had once been a family's home now stood as a testament to destruction. Walls reduced to charred skeletons, furniture melted into unrecognizable shapes. The smell of old smoke still clung to everything, mixing with damp earth and decay. I moved through the wreckage like a ghost, keeping to the shadows, watching the outbuilding where a single lantern burned. A horse stood outside, favoring its left foreleg. A man knelt beside it, his hands moving with practiced care along the injured limb. He was black. That registered first, bringing a small measure of relief before caution reasserted itself. Free or enslaved? Helpful or dangerous? I'd learned long ago that skin color offered no guarantee of safety. I crouched behind a collapsed beam, close enough now to observe detail. The man wore a long duster coat despite the warm night, and I caught the glint of metal at his hip. A revolver, holstered but accessible. His movements were unhurried, almost meditative, as he wrapped the horse's leg in clean cloth. He spoke to the animal in low tones, words I couldn't make out but delivered with genuine gentleness. Something about his manner suggested competence, control. This was not a man who startled easily or acted without purpose. I shifted my weight, trying to decide whether to circle around the homestead entirely or risk asking for directions. The movement was slight, barely a rustle of fabric against wood, but his head came up instantly. "I mean you no harm," he said without turning around. His voice was deep, measured, with an accent that suggested northern education overlaying southern roots. "There's water in my canteen if you need it." "Clean." I froze. How long had he known I was there? He finished tying off the bandage and stood slowly, keeping his hands visible and away from his weapon. When he turned to face my hiding spot, I saw his features clearly in the moonlight. Late 30s, perhaps, with a weathered face and eyes that had seen too much. Eyes like mine. "The horse stepped in a gopher hole about 2 miles back," he continued, as if we were having a normal conversation. "She'll be fine with rest, but I won't be riding anywhere tonight. You're welcome to share my fire." "I don't need your fire." I stood, stepping into the open but keeping distance between us. My hand rested near the small knife tucked into my waistband, useless against a gun, but better than nothing. He nodded, accepting my refusal without argument. "Fair enough. What do you need?" "Directions. To the nearest river crossing." His eyes traveled over me, taking in my torn dress, the scratches on my arms, the way I held myself ready to run. When his gaze lingered briefly on my midsection, I realized the ledger had shifted, its corner now visible beneath my shawl. I yanked the fabric to cover it, but too late. Something changed in his expression. Not suspicion exactly, but recognition. He'd seen that seal before. The Beaufort family crest embossed in the leather. "The Mississippi's about 15 miles northeast," he said carefully. "But there's a smaller crossing on the Hatchie River, maybe 8 miles due north. Less trafficked, easier to ford this time of year." I studied his face for signs of deception, found none, but that meant nothing. Men lied with steady voices and helpful directions all the time. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because you asked." He moved toward the outbuilding, and I tensed, but he only retrieved a canteen from his saddle. He set it on a nearby stump, then stepped back with hands raised slightly. "And because I recognize trouble when I see it, the kind that follows a woman traveling alone at night with plantation documents." So he did know. My fingers tightened around the knife handle. "I'm not going back," I said flatly. "Whatever you're thinking, bounty, reward, doing the right thing, forget it. I'll die first. I'm not a bounty hunter." His tone carried no offense, just statement of fact. "And I'm not interested in sending anyone back into bondage. I'm just a man who made the mistake of riding through the dark without watching where his horse was stepping." He gestured toward the canteen again. "Take it or leave it, but you look like you've been running hard, and dehydration will kill you just as surely as anyone chasing you." I wanted to refuse out of pure stubbornness, but my throat felt like sandpaper. The water I'd drunk from the creek hours ago was long gone. Pride warred with practicality, and practicality won. I approached the stump carefully, snatched the canteen, and backed away immediately. The water inside sloshed, full, or nearly so. I uncapped it and sniffed. Just water, as far as I could tell. I took a small sip, testing for any strange taste, then drank deeper when none came. He watched without comment, his expression unreadable. "The Hatchie crossing," I said, capping the canteen and setting it back on the stump. "How do I know you're not sending me into a trap?" "You don't." He moved back toward his horse, giving me space. "But if I wanted you captured, I could have shot you when you were hiding behind that beam. Or while you're standing in the open right now. Or I could simply wait until you're gone and ride to the nearest patrol station." The logic was sound, which made it both reassuring and more suspicious. Nothing came free in this world. Everyone wanted something. "What's your name?" I asked. He hesitated, as if weighing whether to answer. "Cassian Ward." The name meant nothing to me, but the way he said it, like it carried weight, like people who knew it might react, made me file it away for later consideration. "I didn't ask for help, Mr. Ward, and I don't want company. Point me north, and forget you saw me. North is that way." He indicated the direction with a slight nod. "Follow the game trail beyond those oak trees. It'll take you to high ground where you can see the Hatchie Valley by sunrise." I backed toward the tree line, watching him. He made no move to follow. Just stood there beside his injured horse, a man alone at a burned-out homestead in the middle of nowhere. "Thank you for the water," I said, because my mother had raised me with manners even if the world had tried to beat them out. "Travel safe," he replied. I turned and walked into the darkness, moving quickly once the ruins blocked his line of sight. My instincts screamed that something about the encounter felt wrong. Not dangerous exactly, but significant in ways I couldn't identify. Men didn't just offer help without expecting payment, but I had no time to puzzle it out. The Keatons were still behind me somewhere, and every moment I spent standing still was a moment they gained ground. I found the game trail exactly where Cassian had indicated and followed it uphill through thick underbrush. The eastern sky was just beginning to lighten, that deep blue that came before true dawn. I'd been running for almost 12 hours straight. My body was reaching its limits. Blisters had formed on my feet. My legs trembled with exhaustion. The adrenaline that had sustained me through the smokehouse trap was fading, leaving hollow fatigue in its wake, but I kept moving. The trail crested a ridge, and I saw the valley below. A dark ribbon of water cutting through lowlands, the Hatchie River, just as he'd said. I descended carefully, using tree roots as handholds where the slope grew steep. By the time I reached the riverbank, full dawn had broken. Birds sang in the willows. The water moved slow and brown, maybe chest deep at its center. I could wade across, reach the other side, put one more barrier between myself and the hunters. I stepped into the current, gasping as cold water soaked through my skirt. 1 step, 2. The riverbed was soft mud that tried to suck at my feet with each movement. 3 steps, 4. I was almost to the halfway point when I heard the voice behind me. Well, saved us the trouble of getting our feet wet. I turned. 3 men stood on the bank I'd just left. The Keaton brothers, spread out in a line with rifles raised. Their clothes were singed, their faces smudged with soot, but their eyes held deadly focus. The eldest brother smiled. "You're coming back with us, girl. One way or another." The eldest Keaton brother's smile widened as he waded into the river, his boots displacing brown water in slow ripples. His brothers remained on the bank, rifles trained on me with practiced steadiness. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be," he said, his voice carrying the false kindness of a man used to getting his way. "Hand over that ledger and come quiet. You might even make it back with all your fingers intact." I retreated deeper into the current, the water now reaching my waist. The cold numbed my legs, but fear kept me sharp. My hand instinctively moved to protect the ledger beneath my shawl. "I don't have anything," I lied. The words sounded hollow even to my own ears. "We tracked you from the plantation through burnt smokehouse wreckage and half the county beyond." The eldest Keaton took another step forward. Water soaked his shirt now, but he didn't seem to notice. "We know exactly what you took. That book's worth more than you could possibly understand. Then you should understand why I can't give it back." His expression hardened. The false kindness evaporated like morning mist. "Last chance, girl. The ledger. Now." I shook my head, backing up until the current pulled harder at my dress. If I went much deeper, I'd lose my footing entirely. The river would carry me downstream, maybe to safety, maybe to drowning. Either option seemed preferable to returning to the plantation. "Kill her if you have to," one of the brothers called from the bank. "We can fish the book out of her clothes." "No." The eldest raised his hand without looking back. "They want her alive if possible. The example needs to be thorough." The word example sent ice through my veins that had nothing to do with the river water. I'd seen what happened to runaways who were made into examples. The whipping posts, the brandings, the mutilations designed to discourage any thoughts of freedom in those who remained. Ruth would see it happen. They'd make sure she did. "I'll destroy it," I said desperately. "I'll tear every page to pieces and scatter them in this river before I let you take me back. Then we'll take what's left, and you'll die slow for the trouble." He lunged forward, his hand shooting out to grab my arm. His fingers closed around my wrist like an iron shackle. The rifle shot cracked across the water so loud it made my ears ring. The Keaton brothers' weapon exploded from his other hand, spinning through the air before splashing into the river 3 feet away. He released me instantly, stumbling backward and clutching his stinging palm. All 3 brothers spun toward the source of the shot. Cassian Ward stood on the eastern bank, the one I'd been trying to reach. His rifle was still raised, smoke curling from the barrel. He must have circled around while I was talking, positioning himself for the perfect angle. "Step away from her," Cassian said. His voice carried absolute authority despite its calmness. "All of you, back to your side of the river." "This ain't your concern, friend." The eldest Keaton backed away from me slowly, his eyes never leaving Cassian's rifle. We're lawfully pursuing a fugitive slave. Interfering makes you guilty of aiding and abetting. I don't see a fugitive. I see a woman defending herself from armed men. She stole plantation property. We have every legal right. You have the right to turn around and ride back where you came from. Cassian's rifle remained perfectly steady. Do it now, while you still can. One of the brothers on the bank raised his weapon, but Cassian's barrel shifted toward him with frightening speed. The brother froze. "I can hit a playing card at 100 yards, Cassian said conversationally. Your head's considerably larger. Think carefully about your next move. The tension stretched out like a wire pulled taut. I stood in the river between them, water swirling around my waist, hardly daring to breathe. Finally, the eldest Keaton spoke. You know what's in that ledger? Cassian didn't answer. It's not just plantation business. That book's got names, dates, routes, evidence of a trading network that stretches from here to New Orleans to Charleston. Legislators, merchants, ship captains, people who will burn entire counties to keep their operations quiet. His gaze shifted to me. She's carrying enough information to destroy men who make plantation owners look like church deacons. All the more reason she shouldn't be handed over to you, Cassian replied. We ain't the only ones coming for her. The Keaton brothers' voice took on an urgent edge, as if he genuinely wanted Cassian to understand. You think we're bad? Wait until the network sends their real hunters, men who won't bother with capture, men who'll kill everyone she's ever spoken to, just to be thorough. Then I suggest you give them my regards when you see them. The Keaton brother laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. You're signing both your death warrants. We'll find you. If not today, then tomorrow. If not us, then someone else. That ledger's too valuable. She'll never stop running. Maybe. Cassian's rifle didn't waver. But she won't be running alone. Now move. For a long moment, I thought the brothers would refuse. The eldest stared at Cassian with naked hatred, his jaw working as if chewing on words too violent to speak aloud. Then he turned and slogged back toward the bank. His brothers lowered their rifles reluctantly, backing away but keeping their weapons ready. They gathered their horses from where they'd been tied in the brush, mounting with deliberate slowness that felt like a threat all its own. This ain't over, the eldest called back. Not by half. I'm counting on it, Cassian replied. They rode north, disappearing into the tree line. But I knew they weren't going far. Just far enough to regroup, to plan, to wait for the right moment. Cassian finally lowered his rifle. Can you make it across? I nodded, not trusting my voice. My legs shook as I waded toward him, partly from cold, partly from delayed terror. When I reached the bank, he offered his hand to help me up the muddy slope. I hesitated, then took it. His grip was strong but careful, pulling me onto solid ground without any unnecessary force. He released me immediately once I had my balance. You followed me, I said. Yes. Why? Because I recognize that seal on your ledger, and because I know the Keaton brothers' reputation. He shouldered his rifle. You can't face this alone. I've been alone my whole life. That doesn't mean you should stay that way. His expression softened slightly. They weren't lying about the network. If that book contains what they claim, you're not just running from bounty hunters. You're running from men with enough money and power to hunt you across state lines indefinitely. I wrapped my arms around myself, suddenly aware of how my soaked dress clung to my skin. What do you suggest? We travel together, at least until we figure out what to do with that ledger. He started walking into the forest, clearly expecting me to follow. I know people who might help, and I know how to disappear when necessary. Every instinct told me not to trust him, not to depend on anyone, especially not a man I'd met hours ago at a burned homestead. But the Keatons would be back, and if the network was real, if the ledger truly documented crimes spanning multiple states, then I needed more than my wits and determination to survive. I followed him into the trees. We walked in silence through the afternoon, keeping to deer trails and avoiding anything that looked like it might lead to settlements. Cassian moved with absolute confidence, reading the forest like I read ledgers, finding meaning in details others would miss. By sunset, we reached a narrow ravine carved by seasonal runoff. Rock walls rose on 3 sides, providing shelter and concealment. Cassian deemed it safe enough to risk a small fire. I sat on a flat stone while he gathered kindling, my dress still damp and uncomfortable. The ledger rested on my lap, its leather cover warped slightly from river water, but otherwise intact. When the flames caught, Cassian settled across from me. Firelight played across his features, highlighting old scars I hadn't noticed before. A thin line along his jaw, another across his left eyebrow. "You said you weren't a bounty hunter," I began. "What are you?" Complicated question. He poked at the fire with a stick. "I've been a scout, a guide, a hired gun when the cause was just. Mostly I try to survive without becoming what people expect me to be, which is dangerous, violent. Everything white folks believe a black man with a gun must be." His gaze met mine. "What about you? What were you before you became a woman running for her life?" "A seamstress, a sister, a daughter once." The words came easier than I expected. Someone who thought if she kept her head down and worked hard, maybe she'd be left alone. "And now?" I looked down at the ledger. "Now I'm someone who knows too much." I woke to the smell of smoke and roasting meat. Dawn light filtered through the ravine in pale streams, touching the rough stone walls with gold. The campfire had burned down to embers during the night, but Cassian had already rebuilt it. A skinned rabbit turned slowly on a makeshift spit above the flames. He sat cross-legged, cleaning his rifle with methodical precision. When he noticed I was awake, he gestured toward the fire. "Eat when it's ready. We have a long day ahead." I sat up stiffly, every muscle protesting. Sleeping on cold ground had left me sore in places I didn't know could hurt. I moved closer to the warmth, watching the rabbit's skin crackle and darken. "What kind of long day?" I asked. "The kind where you learn to defend yourself." He reassembled his rifle with practiced ease, the pieces sliding together like they belonged nowhere else. "If we're traveling together, you need skills beyond running and hiding. I don't know how to shoot. I'm aware. That's what training means." He pulled a second, smaller pistol from his saddlebag and placed it on the ground between us. "We'll start with basics: stance, breathing, how to hold a weapon without shooting yourself. Then, tracking avoidance, defensive movement, reading terrain." I stared at the pistol. It looked heavy and dangerous and entirely foreign. "What if I don't want to learn? Then the Keatons will catch you eventually, and everything you've risked will be for nothing." His tone wasn't unkind, just matter of fact. "You can't outrun men with horses and dogs indefinitely. You need to think like a hunter, not prey." The rabbit finished cooking. Cassian divided it carefully, giving me the larger portion. The meat was tough but flavorful, seasoned with wild herbs he must have gathered while I slept. We ate in silence until I finally said, "All right, teach me." The lessons began immediately after we finished eating and kicked dirt over the fire. Cassian led me to a small clearing where fallen logs provided natural cover. He demonstrated proper shooting stance, feet shoulder-width apart, knees slightly bent, weight distributed evenly. "Your body should feel balanced," he explained, adjusting my posture with impersonal touches to my shoulders and hips, like you could move in any direction without having to shift first. I mimicked his position, feeling awkward and exposed. Better. Now the pistol. He placed it in my hands, curling my fingers around the grip. "Never put your finger on the trigger until you're ready to fire. Keep it straight along the barrel guard." The weapon felt impossibly heavy. My arms trembled slightly from the unfamiliar weight. "Aim at that tree with the white mark." Cassian stepped behind me, guiding my arms up to eye level. "Breathe normally. When you're ready to shoot, exhale halfway and squeeze, don't pull, the trigger on the empty space between breaths. I tried. The pistol kicked hard when I fired, the recoil jerking my arms upward. The shot went wide, hitting nothing but air. "Again," Cassian said patiently. We repeated the exercise until my shoulders ached and my ears rang from the reports. Slowly, painfully, my shots began landing closer to the marked tree, not hitting it, not even close, but at least traveling in the right general direction. Between shooting lessons, Cassian taught me how to walk without leaving obvious tracks, how to step on rocks instead of soft earth, how to break branches at angles that looked natural rather than forced, how to read disturbed ground and know whether animals or humans had passed through. "You're good at this," he said during one exercise where I successfully identified the path he'd taken through dense brush. "Better than most people I've trained." "I had to be observant," I replied quietly. "On the plantation, knowing who walked where, when, and why. It kept me alive." Something shifted in his expression. Understanding, maybe. Or recognition. We walked northward through the morning, keeping to game trails and avoiding open ground. The forest here was different from the woods near Beaufort. Older, denser, with massive oaks that blocked out the sun and created a perpetual twilight even at midday. As we walked, Cassian began talking about his past. "My mother was freeborn," he said, stepping over a rotting log. "Educated herself by listening outside schoolhouse windows. Taught me to read using torn pages from books she found in trash heaps. What happened to her? Vigilantes." His voice went flat. "White men who decided a black woman who could quote Shakespeare and do mathematics was dangerous. They came at night when I was 12, burned our cabin. I tried to stop them." He pulled aside his collar, revealing a thick scar that ran from his collarbone toward his shoulder. "They left me for dead. By the time I recovered, she was gone." He let the collar fall back. "I've been careful ever since not to become the thing they feared she was. But sometimes I wonder if being careful is just another kind of surrender." I understood that feeling more than I could articulate. The constant calculation of survival. The exhausting mathematics of staying alive without losing yourself entirely. "I protected children," I said after a long silence. "On the plantation. Younger ones who didn't understand the rules yet. I'd take punishments meant for them when I could. Taught them how to be invisible. Did it work? Sometimes." I touched the ledger hidden under my dress. "Not often enough." We stopped near midday to rest and examine the ledger more carefully. I'd glanced through it before, but only enough to understand the basic horror. Children listed like livestock, prices negotiated, families destroyed for profit. Now, studying it with Cassian, I noticed things I'd missed. "Look at these notations." I pointed to symbols in the margins, small marks that might have been random scratches. They repeat every few pages. Cassian leaned closer, his shoulder touching mine. "Coded references, maybe?" I flipped through systematically, comparing marks. A pattern emerged. The symbols corresponded to locations mentioned in the main text: drop points, meeting places, routes used for transporting enslaved people illegally between states. Here. My finger traced a line that mentioned Louisville. Beside it, a small triangle and star. That same mark appears 8 more times, always connected to the name Thornton. "Representative Thornton?" Cassian's voice tightened. "He's campaigned on anti-slavery platforms for years. According to this, he's been taking bribes to look the other way during illegal transports." I turned more pages, finding similar patterns. It's not just plantations. It's politicians, merchants, ship captains, an entire network operating across state lines. The scope of it made me dizzy. This wasn't just about Beaufort Plantation or even the children marked for sale. It was a coordinated criminal enterprise protected by people who publicly condemned slavery while privately profiting from it. If we expose this, Cassian began, we could destroy them, I finished. Not just escape. Actually hurt the people who built this system. We stared at each other in the dappled forest light. The possibility hung between us. Dangerous, audacious, maybe impossible, but real. We'd need help, Cassian said finally. Resources. People who know how to move information without getting killed for it. Do you know people like that? Maybe. He stood, offering his hand to help me up. There's a settlement about 10 miles north. Free black families and fugitives living together. They might have connections we can use. We walked through the afternoon, the forest gradually thinning as we climbed into rolling hills. By twilight, we reached a ridge overlooking a shallow valley. Below, hidden among thick pine groves, I saw structures, cabins, a small barn, garden plots laid out in careful rows. Smoke rose from multiple chimneys, carrying the smell of cooking food. People moved between buildings, their voices carrying faintly on the evening air. Children played near the gardens while adults worked. It looked peaceful, safe. That's it, Cassian said. The settlement. They call it Haven, though it's not marked on any map. As we descended the ridge, a figure emerged from the tree line. A woman in her 50s with silver-streaked hair and eyes that missed nothing. She held no weapon, but her stance suggested she could handle herself in a fight. Cassian Ward, she said, her voice warm with recognition. Didn't expect to see you again so soon. Mother Elspeth. Cassian inclined his head respectfully. I need to ask a favor. We both do. Her gaze shifted to me, assessing without judgment. You're running. It wasn't a question. Yes, I said. From what? I pulled out the ledger and held it up. From the truth. Mother Elspeth's expression changed. Surprise, understanding, and something that might have been fierce approval. She stepped forward and took the ledger, turning it over in her weathered hands. Come, she said finally. Both of you. There's food waiting, and you look like you need rest. We'll talk about this properly once you've eaten. She led us down into the settlement, where curious faces watched our approach, but no one challenged us. The smell of cooking grew stronger. Cornbread and beans, and something sweet I couldn't identify. For the first time since leaving Beaufort, I felt something almost like safety settle over my shoulders. Mother Elspeth led us to a long wooden table set up outside the largest cabin. 20 or more people gathered there. Men, women, children of all ages. They moved aside to make room for us, offering quiet nods of welcome that felt more genuine than any greeting I'd received in years. A woman with kind eyes placed bowls before us, beans cooked with pork fat, cornbread still warm from the oven, greens seasoned with vinegar. My stomach cramped at the sight. I couldn't remember the last time I'd eaten anything beyond stolen scraps. Eat slowly, Mother Elspeth advised, settling across from us. Your body won't be used to real food. She was right. I forced myself to take small bites despite wanting to devour everything immediately. The cornbread melted on my tongue. The beans were rich and savory. Even the simple greens tasted like mercy. Cassian ate with more restraint, though I noticed him accepting seconds when offered. Around us, conversation flowed naturally. Talk of gardens, repairs needed on the barn, a child's upcoming birthday, normal things, the kind of ordinary life I'd almost forgotten existed. After we finished eating, Mother Elspeth gestured for us to follow her inside the main cabin. The interior was simple but carefully maintained. A large central room with a fireplace, benches along the walls, and shelves holding books, tools, and supplies. 2 other adults joined us, a lean man named Solomon and a younger woman called Pearl. I placed the ledger on the table between us. Mother Elspeth opened it carefully, her fingers tracing the cramped handwriting. She read in silence for several minutes, her expression growing darker with each turned page. This is worse than I imagined, she said finally. These aren't just plantation records. This documents an entire operation. We found coded marks, I explained, pointing to the symbols in the margins. They seemed to reference locations and names. Mother Elspeth nodded slowly. I recognize some of these. This triangle and star? That's a marker for the riverboat docks at Cairo. This circle with a line through it? A warehouse in Memphis, known for holding cargo that doesn't officially exist. Solomon leaned forward, studying the page. These dates match up with known patrol rotations. Whoever kept this ledger knew exactly when authorities would be looking the other way. How do you know patrol schedules? Cassian asked. We have to. Solomon's voice was matter-of-fact. Every family here is either freeborn or escaped. We survive by knowing when it's safe to move, trade, or travel. We track the patterns because our lives depend on it. Pearl traced her finger down a list of names. Representative Thornton, Judge Matthias Crane, Captain Howard Ellis of the Mississippi River Patrol. These are powerful men. Which means exposing them will be dangerous, Mother Elspeth said quietly. They won't simply accept humiliation and legal consequences. They'll retaliate, violently. I know, I said. But how many more children get sold if we do nothing? How many more families destroyed? Mother Elspeth studied me with those penetrating eyes. You understand that once you start this, there's no stopping halfway, no changing your mind when the violence comes? I understand. She turned to Cassian. And you? What's your stake in this? Cassian was quiet for a moment. My mother died because men feared what she represented. I've spent my life trying not to become what they claim to fear. Dangerous, violent, threatening. But maybe some threats need making. Mother Elspeth nodded slowly. Then we'll help you. Not because I think you'll succeed, necessarily, but because trying is better than accepting. The settlement gave us a small cabin at the edge of the clearing, a single room with 2 narrow beds, a wood stove, and a table. Privacy I hadn't experienced since childhood. That first night, I slept so deeply that dawn arrived before I knew it. I woke to find Cassian already up, studying maps spread across the table. The next 2 days passed in careful planning. Solomon brought detailed knowledge of patrol routes, marking them on our maps with different colored ink. The Keaton brothers, he explained, used a relay system, campsites positioned at strategic intervals where they could resupply, rest their horses, and exchange information with other bounty hunters. There's a camp about 15 miles east, Solomon said, pointing to a mark on the map. They rotate through every 5 to 7 days. Last sighting was 3 days ago, which means they're due back soon. Cassian studied the terrain around the camp location. What's the approach like? Dense forest on 3 sides. The 4th side opens to a creek. They typically set up near the water. Easier access for the horses. Cover and concealment? Cassian asked. Plenty. Old-growth timber with good sight lines from higher ground? Pearl contributed information about supply caches the settlement maintained throughout the region. Hidden stores of food, ammunition, and medicine that we could use if we needed to move quickly. Mother Elspeth helped me decode more of the ledger's entries, explaining the symbols and references I didn't understand. Each revelation deepened my understanding of how thoroughly organized the network was. It wasn't opportunistic crime. It was systematic exploitation protected by institutional power. During breaks from planning, I walked through the settlement gardens. Children played nearby, laughing and running without the constant fear I'd grown up with. Women worked the soil without overseers watching. Men built and repaired without needing permission. This was what freedom looked like in its smallest, most fragile form. A community carving out dignity against impossible odds. On the second afternoon, I found Cassian helping repair the barn roof alongside several other men. He worked efficiently, driving nails with practiced precision while carrying on easy conversation. He looked almost peaceful. That evening, we gathered again with Mother Elspeth, Solomon, and Pearl to finalize our plan. The Keatons keep their best horses at the relay camp, Solomon explained. There's supply maps, too, documentation of other camps and contacts across the region. If you can take that camp, you gain significant advantage. They're dangerous, Pearl warned. 3 brothers, all experienced hunters. They won't surrender easily. We're not looking for surrender, Cassian said quietly. We're looking to remove a threat and gain intelligence. Mother Elspeth pushed a small leather pouch across the table. Ammunition, clean and dry. Pearl checked each round personally. Thank you, I said. Don't thank me yet. Her expression was serious. You're about to cross a line. Once you attack them directly, there's no pretending you're just fugitives anymore. You become insurgents, threats to the entire system. Good, I said. Let them fear us for once. That night, lying in the narrow bed while Cassian slept across the room, I felt something unfamiliar stirring in my chest. Not quite hope. Hope felt too fragile, too easily crushed. This was harder, sharper. Purpose. For years, survival had been my only goal. Endure. Protect when possible. Don't break. That was the extent of what I could imagine. Now, I imagined more. I imagined the ledger's contents printed in newspaper. Thornton, disgraced. Crane removed from the bench. Ellis stripped of his command. The entire network collapsing under the weight of its own documented crimes. I imagined Ruth reading about it someday, knowing I'd fought back. As dawn approached, Cassian and I prepared our supplies, weapons, ammunition, dried food, water, the maps Solomon provided. We moved quietly, not wanting to wake the settlement. Mother Elspeth appeared anyway, standing in the doorway as first light touched the eastern sky. The camp is roughly 4 hours east, she said. Follow the creek until you reach the split oak, then head northeast. You'll find it. We'll be careful, Cassian promised. Be more than careful. Be ruthless. She looked at both of us. They certainly will be. We left Haven as the settlement woke around us, smoke rising from chimneys, voices calling morning greetings. Normal life continuing while we walked toward violence. The forest swallowed us quickly. Within minutes, the settlement disappeared behind curtains of pine and oak. We moved steadily eastward, following the creek's winding path through increasingly rough terrain. Neither of us spoke much. There wasn't much to say. We both understood what we were about to do. By mid-morning, we found the split oak, a massive tree struck by lightning, its trunk divided into 2 separate crowns. We turned northeast, climbing through dense underbrush. The Keaton brothers' camp came into view just before noon. The Keaton brothers' relay camp sat nestled in a small clearing beside the creek, exactly where Solomon said it would be. 3 horses grazed on a rope line. A canvas lean-to sheltered their supplies. A cold fire pit marked the center of the camp. 2 of the brothers slept under the lean-to. The third sat on a stump, cleaning his rifle. We watched from the tree line. Dawn light filtered through the canopy, painting everything in shades of gray and gold. My heart hammered against my ribs. Cassian touched my shoulder, pointing to positions he'd marked earlier. I nodded. We'd gone over the plan 3 times during our approach. I moved first, circling wide to approach from the creek side. The morning sounds covered my footsteps. Birdsong, running water, wind through leaves. I reached the horses without being spotted. The animals shifted nervously as I approached. I murmured soft reassurances, the same sounds I'd used calming draft horses at the plantation. They settled slightly. From across the camp, Cassian's whistle cut through the morning. A mockingbird call, our signal. I untied the rope line. The brother on the stump jerked upright, reaching for his rifle. Cassian's shot rang out, knocking the weapon from his hands. The man shouted, diving for cover. His brothers scrambled awake, grabbing for guns. I mounted the nearest horse, taking the other 2 lead ropes. The animals spooked at the gunfire, but I held them firm. Years of handling plantation livestock serving me now. Another shot from Cassian. This one struck the ground inches from the eldest brother's boot. The message was clear. We could kill them if we wanted. Down! Cassian's voice carried across the clearing. "Weapons on the ground! Now!" The brothers hesitated. The youngest one started to raise his rifle. Cassian's next shot took the hat clean off his head. They dropped their weapons. "Kick them away!" Cassian ordered, emerging from cover with his rifle trained on the eldest. "Slow movements!" They obeyed, their faces twisted with rage and humiliation. I rode the horses across the clearing while Cassian kept them covered. At the lean-to, I dismounted quickly, gathering supplies, ammunition, dried food, canteens. Most importantly, I found their maps and documents rolled in an oilcloth tube. "You're making a mistake," the eldest brother growled. "We'll find you. You'll what?" I interrupted, stuffing supplies into saddlebags. "Hunt us? You already tried that. How'd it work out?" The youngest brother spat toward me. "You think stealing our horses makes you free? You're still just—" Cassian fired again, dirt erupting between the man's legs. Finish that sentence, and the next one goes higher. I mounted again, securing the supply bags and document tube. The three Keaton brothers stood in a tight group, unarmed and helpless. For the first time since Beaufort Plantation, I saw fear in the eyes of men who'd hunted my people. "You wanted to deliver me in chains," I said, looking down at them. "But you're the ones standing here with nothing. Remember this feeling. Remember what it's like being powerless." Cassian backed toward his horse, rifle still trained. Once mounted, we turned and rode hard toward the tree line. Behind us, the Keaton brothers shouted threats and curses that faded quickly into the forest noise. We rode for hours, following the creek back toward Haven. The stolen horses ran strong and sure. The maps promised invaluable intelligence. The supplies would support us for weeks. For the first time since discovering the ledger, I felt something beyond desperate survival. We'd confronted the system directly and won. We'd humiliated the hunters, taken their tools, proven that resistance was possible. Cassian rode beside me, his expression guardedly hopeful. "That went better than expected." "They didn't expect us to be the threat," I said. "They thought we'd keep running." "We did more than stop running." "Yes." We started hunting. The words felt powerful. True. Like naming something that had been forming inside me since the smokehouse trap. We pushed the horses hard, eager to return to the settlement and share our victory with Mother Elspeth and the others. They'd helped make this possible. They deserved to know their support hadn't been wasted. The forest gradually became familiar. Landmarks Solomon had pointed out during our journey east. We were close now, maybe another mile. Then I smelled smoke. Not campfire smoke, not cooking smoke. The thick, acrid smell of burning structures and destruction. Cassian smelled it too. His expression shifted immediately to alert alarm. We urged the horses faster. We broke through the tree line into what had been Haven. Every cabin was destroyed. Some still smoldered, sending black smoke into the afternoon sky. The main building where we'd studied the ledger was a collapsed shell of charred timbers. The barn had burned completely, leaving only a stone foundation. Bodies lay scattered across the clearing. I dismounted before my horse fully stopped, stumbling toward the ruins. My mind refused to process what I was seeing. This morning, children had played here. Women had tended gardens. Men had worked together on repairs. Now there was only ash and death. Cassian moved toward the main cabin's remains, calling for survivors. His voice cracked on Mother Elspeth's name. I found Pearl first. She lay near the garden, a bullet wound in her chest. Her eyes stared sightlessly at the sky. Solomon was nearby, his body positioned as if he'd tried to shield someone. Burns covered his back and arms. Movement caught my eye. A small figure shifting beneath an overturned water trough. I ran over, lifting the trough carefully. A young girl, maybe 8 years old, one I'd watched playing jump rope 2 days ago, crawled out. Her dress was torn, and her face was streaked with soot. "They came back," she whispered. The hunters came back with more men. They said this was a lesson. They said anyone who helped fugitives would burn. She collapsed against me, sobbing. I held her, my own tears coming now. Cassian appeared, supporting Mother Elspeth. The elder woman was badly wounded, burns on her arms and a deep cut across her forehead. Blood soaked her shawl. We tried to fight, she said weakly. Some escaped into the forest, but many she couldn't finish, didn't need to. The evidence surrounded us. We found 3 more survivors hiding in the root cellar beneath the burned cookhouse. 2 adults and a teenage boy, all injured but alive. By sunset, we'd counted 12 dead, 7 missing, hopefully escaped. 5 survivors in addition to us. Mother Elspeth refused to lie down despite her wounds. She sat on a stone near the garden, watching us work. "You can't stop now," she said as I brought her water. "You understand that. This is exactly why the ledger matters. This is the system protecting itself." "We did this," Cassian said bitterly. He stood near Solomon's body, his shoulders slumped. "We led them here. We made you all targets." "We were always targets," Mother Elspeth corrected. "From the moment we chose freedom. From the moment we built something beautiful, where they told us we couldn't exist. You didn't cause this. They did." I knelt beside the child I'd found, a girl named Mercy, who'd shown me her corn-husk doll the first evening we'd arrived. Her small body lay near the well, killed trying to run. Rage filled me. Not the hot, explosive kind. Cold, calculating, permanent. The Keaton brothers had done this. Their reinforcements, the network that protected them, the entire system that made this violence profitable and legal. We buried the dead as darkness fell. Simple graves dug into the soft earth of the garden they'd tended. No markers, no ceremonies, just the work of survival. Mother Elspeth spoke quiet words over each grave. The survivors who could stand joined us. The young girl I'd pulled from beneath the trough held my hand throughout, squeezing tight. When the last grave was covered, we sat in silence beside the ashes of Haven. Cassian stared at his hands. I stared at the ruins. Mother Elspeth stared at nothing, her wounded eyes reflecting firelight from the still smoldering timbers. The maps and supplies we'd stolen sat nearby. Our great victory from this morning felt hollow now, meaningless against this destruction. But Mother Elspeth's words echoed in my mind. You can't stop now. She was right. Stopping would make every death here meaningless, would prove the system could terrorize us into submission forever. I thought of Ruth, still enslaved at Beaufort, of Mercy, dead before learning what freedom could truly mean, of every person who'd welcomed us with food and hope and paid for it with their lives. The ledger sat in my saddlebag, proof of the conspiracy, evidence that could topple powerful men. We couldn't bring back the dead, but we could make sure their deaths meant something. The morning came cold and gray. I hadn't slept. Neither had Cassian. We sat on opposite sides of a dying campfire we'd built away from Haven's ruins. The survivors had scattered into the forest before dawn, carrying what little they could salvage. Mother Elspeth went with them, her wounds bandaged, but her spirit somehow unbroken. She'd squeezed my hand before leaving. "Finish it," she'd whispered. "Make them pay." Now only Cassian and I remained, surrounded by smoke-tainted silence. He stared at his hands like they were stained with something he couldn't wash away. His rifle lay untouched beside him. He hadn't spoken since the others left. I poked at the dying embers with a stick, watching sparks rise and fade. My grief felt different than his, sharper, colder. It wasn't pulling me inward. It was pushing me forward. "We should move soon," I said quietly. "The Keatons might come back to check the ruins." Cassian didn't respond. "Did you hear me?" "I heard you." His voice was hollow. "I just don't know where we're supposed to go, what we're supposed to do now. We finish what we started." He finally looked up, his eyes red-rimmed. Finish it? Marielle? 12 people died yesterday. 12. Because we led those hunters straight to a peaceful community. The hunters did this, not us. We might as well have lit the torches ourselves. He stood abruptly, pacing toward the tree line. If we hadn't come to Haven, if we hadn't involved them in our fight, they were already involved, I interrupted, standing too. Every free black person, every escaped slave, every settlement like Haven, they're all already targets. The system hunts us, regardless of what we do. But we made them a priority target. We brought the Keatons' attention directly to them. The Keatons would have found Haven eventually. Men like them always do. They burn and kill and terrorize, because that's how the system maintains power. Cassian turned to face me, his expression anguished. So what's your solution? More violence? More bloodshed? We kill the Keatons. Their network sends more hunters. We expose the ledger. They retaliate against more communities. Where does it end? It ends when they're too afraid to hunt us anymore? You can't actually believe that. I do believe it. I moved closer, my voice steady despite the fury building inside me. They've controlled us through fear our entire lives. Fear of the whip. Fear of separation. Fear of death. Maybe it's time they experience that same fear. And what happens to us in the process? Cassian asked. What do we become? We become what we need to be to survive. No. He shook his head firmly. We become exactly what they say we are. Violent. Dangerous. Proof that we can't be trusted with freedom. I stepped even closer, looking directly into his eyes. They already believe that about us. Every single one of them. Whether we're peaceful or violent, educated or illiterate, free or enslaved, it doesn't matter. They've already decided what we are. So we should just prove them right? We should stop caring what they think. The words hung between us. Cassian's jaw tightened, but he didn't respond immediately. I continued, my voice lower, but more intense. I watched a child die yesterday, Cassian. Mercy. She was 8 years old. She showed me her corn-husk doll the first night we arrived. She talked about wanting to learn to read. Now she's in a grave we dug by hand because the Keaton brothers decided to send a message. I know what happened. Then you know we can't walk away. You know that stopping now means every death was meaningless. It means the system wins. Again. Like it always does. Cassian turned away, his shoulders tense. I spent my whole life trying not to become a weapon. My mother raised me to be more than what they expected. More than their fear and hatred. If I start killing to prove a point, you won't be killing to prove a point, I said quietly. You'll be killing to protect people who can't protect themselves. To stop men who profit from our suffering. That's not becoming a monster. That's justice. Justice. He laughed bitterly. You sound like the vigilantes who killed my mother. They called it justice too. The comparison stung, but I didn't back down. Your mother was innocent. The Keaton brothers are not. There's a difference between lynching and execution. The rope looks the same either way. We stood in silence for a long moment. The morning sun filtered weakly through the trees, casting long shadows across the abandoned campfire. Finally, Cassian spoke again, his voice barely audible. I'm afraid of what comes after. If we do this, if we become hunters instead of hunted, what happens when the violence stops feeling necessary? When it starts feeling righteous? Then we'll deal with that when it comes, I said. But right now, we have a choice. We can run and hide and hope the Keatons eventually give up. Or we can use what we know to end this. You make it sound simple. It is simple. Not easy, but simple. Cassian sat back down by the fire, resting his head in his hands. I remained standing, waiting. The silence stretched until midday. The sun climbed higher despite the gray clouds. The forest sounds gradually returned, birds calling, branches creaking, distant water flowing. Eventually, Cassian reached for the saddlebag containing the stolen maps and documents. He spread them carefully on the ground between us, studying the routes and notations. "The ferry crossing," he said finally, pointing to a marked location. "According to this, the network uses it regularly, twice monthly for transport. Next run is in 4 days." I knelt beside him, examining the map. The crossing was marked clearly, with notes about guard rotations and payment schedules. It was a vital hub for their entire operation. "Perfect choke point," I observed. "Limited escape routes. We'd have the advantage. If we can get there first, set the trap properly." Cassian traced the approach routes with his finger. "We'd need to account for reinforcements. The Keatons won't come alone after what happened at their camp. Let them bring reinforcements. More targets." He looked at me sharply. "You've changed, Marielle. Since Haven burned. I can see it in your eyes." "Good," I said. "Maybe change was necessary." We spent the next hours planning in detail. Cassian's military experience shaped our strategy. He understood terrain advantages, sight lines, defensive positions. My knowledge of the Ledger's information helped us anticipate how many men might be present, what resources they'd carry. By dusk, we had a workable plan. Brutal, direct, final. We mounted the stolen horses as the sun touched the horizon. Storm clouds gathered in the distance, dark and heavy with rain. The air smelled of moisture and approaching weather. Cassian checked his rifle one last time before we rode out. No turning back after this. "There was no turning back the moment I stole that ledger," I replied. "We've just been running toward this point the entire time. Toward becoming killers. Toward becoming free." We rode northwest, following the map toward the ferry crossing. The landscape darkened around us as clouds obscured the failing light. Thunder rumbled distantly. Neither of us spoke as the miles passed. The weight of what we planned sat heavy between us. Not doubt exactly, but awareness. Understanding that we were crossing a line that couldn't be uncrossed. The storm broke as full darkness fell. Rain came in cold, driving sheets that soaked through our clothes and turned the trail to mud. Lightning split the sky, illuminating twisted tree branches and rocky outcroppings. We pressed forward through the downpour, following the marked route even as visibility dropped to nearly nothing. The horses moved carefully, heads lowered against the weather. Somewhere ahead lay the ferry crossing. The Keaton brothers, the reckoning we'd chosen. Behind us lay Haven's ashes and the graves of 12 people who'd offered us hope. The rain drummed against leaves and earth, washing nothing clean. We reached the ferry crossing 3 hours before dawn. The rain had stopped sometime during the night, leaving everything wet and gleaming under a thin moon. The crossing itself was exactly as the map indicated. A narrow wooden platform tethered to both banks, wide enough for 2 horses side by side, operated by a pulley system that ran along thick ropes spanning the river. The approach from the south followed a natural ravine that funneled travelers into a single path, perfect for what we needed. "Start with the chains," Cassian said quietly, surveying the terrain. Along both sides of the path, low enough to catch legs but hidden by brush, I unpacked the supplies we'd gathered: chains looted from the Keaton camp, weighted fishing nets purchased from a trader 2 days back, sharpened wooden stakes I'd carved during our ride. Each piece served a specific purpose in the trap we'd designed. The work was methodical. I stretched chains between trees at ankle height, covering them with fallen leaves and broken branches. The weighted nets went into the trees above the path, rigged to fall when their support ropes were cut. Stakes angled upward from concealed positions, ready to impale anyone who stumbled backward. Cassian watched me work for a moment, his expression unreadable in the darkness. Then he gathered his rifle and ammunition and climbed toward the ridge overlooking the crossing. I continued alone, moving carefully through the pre-dawn gloom. My hands remembered the motions from years of detailed sewing work. Precise, careful, intentional. But instead of stitching fabric, I was weaving death. The irony wasn't lost on me. By the time the eastern sky began to lighten, everything was ready. I'd created a killing field disguised as an ordinary forest path. Anyone approaching the ferry would walk directly into overlapping hazards designed to disorient, disable, and expose. I found my own position behind a fallen log near the ferry platform itself, where I had clear sight lines to the approach and multiple escape routes if necessary. The pistol Cassian had given me sat heavy in my hand, loaded, cocked, ready. The sunrise came slowly, painting the wet trees in shades of gray and gold. Birds began their morning calls. The river flowed steadily past, indifferent to what was about to happen on its banks. We waited. Time stretched. My legs cramped from staying motionless. Moisture soaked through my borrowed trousers. Mosquitoes found the exposed skin at my neck and wrists. I didn't move. Mid-morning arrived with the sound of approaching horses. 4 riders coming from the south just as we'd anticipated. I recognized the Keaton brothers immediately. Their distinctive hats, their confident posture, their weapons carried with casual familiarity. 2 other men rode with them, hired muscle judging by their worn Confederate-style jackets and mismatched equipment. They were talking as they entered the ravine, relaxed and unsuspecting. The eldest Keaton was mid-sentence when his horse hit the first trap. I'd oiled several boards and scattered them across the path, camouflaged with dirt and leaves. The horse's hooves found no purchase on the slick surface. The animal whinnied sharply and stumbled sideways, throwing its rider hard against a tree trunk. Before the other riders could react, Cassian fired from the ridge. The shot wasn't aimed to kill. It struck the ground between the remaining horses, causing them to rear and scatter. One mercenary fell immediately. The other fought to control his mount as it crashed through underbrush directly into the concealed chains. The chains caught the horse's front legs mid-stride. The animal went down, screaming, trapping its rider beneath its weight. The remaining Keaton brother wheeled his horse around, reaching for his rifle, but I was already moving. I cut the support rope for the first net, and heavy weights dragged it down directly onto him. He toppled from the saddle, tangled in wet netting, cursing viciously. Cassian fired again. Another warning shot that drove the eldest Keaton away from his fallen weapon and deeper into the prepared terrain. The man scrambled for cover, but every direction led to another hazard. Stakes hidden in the underbrush. More chains waiting beneath disturbed leaves. Nowhere safe to run. The trapped mercenary tried to crawl from beneath his fallen horse. I walked toward him calmly, pistol raised. He froze when he saw my face. "Please," he said. "I'm just hired help. This wasn't my fight. You chose whose side to be on. I didn't know what they were hunting. They said it was just a runaway." "Just a runaway," I repeated. "Just someone's property. Just a thing to be returned for money." His eyes widened as understanding hit. "Listen, I can help you. I know things about the network. Routes, names. I can—" Cassian's voice cut through from the ridge. "Marielle, the one in the net is getting free." I turned. The second Keaton had worked one arm loose and was reaching for a knife at his belt. I crossed the distance quickly and kicked the blade away, then pressed my pistol against his forehead. "Don't move." He went very still. Up close, I could see he was younger than I'd thought. Maybe 30, with a thin scar across his cheek and eyes that showed no remorse, only calculation. "You know why we're here?" I asked. "The ledger, the settlement you burned, the people you killed. Just business." His voice was steady, unafraid. "Nothing personal." It was personal to them, to the child named Mercy, to Mother Elspeth, to every person in that community. They harbored fugitives. Consequences were inevitable. I pulled back the pistol's hammer. The click was very loud in the sudden quiet. "Wait!" the eldest Keaton called from where Cassian held him at rifle point. "You kill him, you'll hang. Both of you. Every lawman in 3 states will hunt you down." "They already hunt us," I said, without looking away from the man beneath my gun. What's the difference? The difference is you'll prove them right. Prove you're savages who can't be reasoned with, can't be civilized, can't be anything but animals. Cassian descended from the ridge, his rifle trained on the eldest brother. His face was hard, unreadable. "Marielle," he said quietly, "your choice. I won't stop you." I looked at the man in the net, at his calculating eyes and complete absence of regret, at the expensive boots he wore, paid for with blood money earned capturing people whose only crime was wanting freedom. I thought about Mercy, showing me her corn husk doll, about Ruth still trapped on Beaufort Plantation, about every person the ledger documented as sold, traded, or killed for profit. The system maintained itself through men like this, men who followed orders and collected payment and never questioned the horror they enabled. "You chose this," I said. "Every step, every decision. You chose to hunt us, to burn Haven, to kill children. Those were your choices. I was just—" I pulled the trigger. The sound echoed across the water. Birds exploded from nearby trees. The body went limp beneath the net. I stood slowly, my hand steady despite the pistol's recoil. The eldest Keaton stared at me, his face pale. "You're next," I said, walking toward him. Cassian didn't lower his rifle, but he spoke carefully. "Marielle, think about what you're doing. I have thought about it. For days. This is exactly what needs to happen." The eldest brother backed away until he hit the tree trunk behind him, trapped between my pistol and Cassian's rifle. The trapped mercenary whimpered from beneath his horse, suddenly understanding that no one was walking away. "We can make a deal," the Keaton said desperately. "I know things, important things about the network, people you'd want exposed. The ledger already tells us everything we need. Then what do you want?" I met his eyes directly. "I want you to understand what it feels like, to be hunted, to be cornered, to know death is coming, and there's nothing you can do to stop it. Please." Did Mercy say please? Did Mother Elspeth beg? His mouth worked soundlessly. Cassian moved to my side, his voice low. "If you do this, there's no pretending we're anything but what they'll call us. Killers, criminals, threats to civilized society." "Good," I said. "Let them fear us." The storm clouds that had threatened all night finally broke overhead. Rain began falling again, cold and heavy, drumming against the leaves and the river surface. I pulled the trigger a second time. The eldest Keaton fell without a sound. The mercenary beneath the horse started sobbing. I walked over and looked down at him, my pistol still raised. "Go," I said. "Tell everyone what happened here. Tell them we're not running anymore." The rain stopped as suddenly as it had begun. I stood in the sudden silence, water dripping from my hair and clothes, the pistol still warm in my hand. The bodies of the Keaton brothers lay where they'd fallen, their blood mixing with rainwater and mud. Cassian moved methodically through the killing ground, gathering weapons and examining the hired mercenaries' saddlebags. He found letters, maps, a small leather purse heavy with coins, everything that could identify the bounty hunters or trace back to their employers. The surviving mercenary had already fled into the forest, limping badly but driven by terror. I could still hear him crashing through underbrush, putting as much distance as possible between himself and us. Good. Let him spread the word. Let them all know what happened here. "We need to burn it," Cassian said, his voice flat. "All of it. Leave nothing that connects us to this place." I nodded, too exhausted for words. We worked together in the gray morning light, piling the bodies away from the water's edge where the fire wouldn't spread. Cassian added dried brush and branches, then struck flint until flames caught and held. The smoke rose thick and black, carrying the smell of burning flesh across the river. I didn't look away. This was the price of justice. Ugly, brutal, impossible to romanticize. While the fire burned, we dismantled our traps, recovered chains and nets, gathered spent rifle cartridges, every piece of evidence that could prove what happened here went into the flames or the river's current. By midday, nothing remained except charred ground and ashes already scattering in the wind. We mounted the captured horses, fine animals, well-fed and trained, probably worth more than most enslaved people fetched at auction, and turned north. Neither of us spoke for hours. There was nothing left to say about what we'd done. The landscape changed gradually as we rode. Tennessee's dense forests gave way to Missouri's rolling hills. The plantations grew smaller, more scattered. We passed through towns where free black people walked openly, though still watched with suspicion by white residents. 2 days of steady travel brought us to a small river town, whose name I never learned. Cassian led us to a modest boarding house on the edge of the settlement, painted white with green shutters and a hand-carved sign reading, "Rooms available." The woman who answered our knock was perhaps 60, gray-haired and sharp-eyed, wearing a simple dress and an expression that revealed nothing. "Cassian Ward," she said quietly. "Been some years. Mrs. Fairweather. I need to ask a favor." She looked between us, her gaze lingering on my mud-stained clothes and the careful way I carried myself. "Come inside, quickly." The boarding house's interior was clean and sparsely furnished. Mrs. Fairweather led us to a back room where we could speak privately. Cassian explained our situation, carefully edited, focusing on the ledger rather than the violence. "This network," Mrs. Fairweather said when he finished, examining the ledger's pages with practiced eyes. "It implicates powerful men, plantation owners, politicians, military suppliers. Exposing this will cause considerable upheaval." "That's the intention," I said. She studied me more carefully. "You understand the risks? Once this information becomes public, those implicated will seek revenge. They'll hunt anyone connected to the ledger's exposure. They're already hunting us. At least this way, their crimes become public." Mrs. Fairweather smiled slightly. "Fair point." She closed the ledger and stood. "I know someone at the Chicago Tribune, a journalist who's published exposés on the slave trade before. He'll know what to do with this." "How long?" Cassian asked. 2 days to get the ledger to Chicago by rail. Another day for verification. If the information is as damning as it appears, publication within the week. We stayed at the boarding house that night, sleeping in actual beds for the first time in what felt like forever. Mrs. Fairweather provided hot food, clean water for washing, and clothes that fit properly. Small kindnesses that felt enormous after weeks of running. The next morning, I watched through a window as Mrs. Fairweather departed in a covered wagon, the ledger hidden among legitimate cargo. She would deliver it to a railroad contact who would ensure it reached Chicago without inspection. "Now we wait," Cassian said beside me. But waiting felt impossible. Every moment in one place increased the danger. We spent the day preparing to leave, acquiring supplies, studying maps, planning routes that would take us in different directions. Because we both understood, without discussing it explicitly, that our partnership was ending. We'd accomplished what needed doing. The ledger would expose the network. The Keaton brothers would hunt no one else. The settlement's destruction had been avenged, however incompletely. What came next required different paths. The coded message arrived on the second afternoon, delivered by a young boy who handed Cassian a sealed envelope and departed immediately. Inside was a single sentence written in careful script. "The stone has been cast. Ripples spreading." Mrs. Fairweather's confirmation. The ledger had reached the Tribune. Journalists were already investigating, following the documented leads to plantations and political offices across 3 states. Men who thought themselves untouchable would wake to find their crimes exposed in print, distributed to thousands of readers, impossible to suppress or deny. The thought brought fierce satisfaction. That evening, Cassian and I shared a final meal at Mrs. Fairweather's table. She'd prepared chicken and vegetables, fresh bread, preserved peaches for dessert, Food that reminded me of better times, before Beaufort Plantation, before the Ledger, before I'd learned to kill without hesitation. "Where will you go?" I asked Cassian as we ate. "West, initially. Then wherever I'm needed. There are always people who require protection on dangerous roads." He paused. "You?" "North. I'll help others escape, like Haven helped us. Quietly, carefully. No grand gestures that attract attention. Using what you learned from the Ledger. And from you. The tracking, the defensive strategies, the way to read terrain for advantages." I met his eyes. "You taught me how to survive beyond just running." "You already knew how. I just provided different tools." We finished eating, in companionable silence. Mrs. Fairweather retired early, giving us privacy for our parting. Dawn arrived cold and clear. I'd packed my few possessions before sleeping, ready to leave at first light. Cassian waited outside with the horses, his own belongings already secured. We rode together to the edge of town, then stopped where the road split. One path heading west, the other north. "Thank you," I said, the words inadequate but sincere, "for everything, the training, the protection, the trust. You gave as much as I did. More, considering what you risked." Cassian adjusted his hat against the rising sun. "What you did at the crossing was necessary. I wasn't going to say otherwise. Just don't let it consume you. Violence as a tool is different than violence as an identity." "I'll remember." He extended his hand. I clasped it firmly, feeling calluses earned from years of hard riding and harder choices. "Be safe, Marielle." "You too, Cassian." He turned his horse west without looking back. I watched until he disappeared over a distant hill, then urged my own mount north toward the future I'd chosen. The sun climbed higher, burning off morning mist, and revealing the landscape in sharp detail. Fields and forests, rivers and roads, all the hidden routes where desperate people fled toward freedom. I would learn those routes, master them, use them to help others escape the same system that had tried to destroy me. The plantation owners, the bounty hunters, the entire network of men who profited from human suffering, they'd spent generations hunting us, chasing us, forcing us to run in constant terror. But I wasn't running anymore. I was hunting them now, just as carefully, just as relentlessly, using the very skills they'd forced me to develop. Standing on a ridge overlooking the northern road, I felt something shift inside me. Not peace exactly, but purpose, clarity about who I'd become and what I intended to do with that transformation. The wind carried the scent of distant rain and growing things. Somewhere behind me, the Chicago Tribune was preparing to publish evidence that would shake the foundations of the slave trade. Somewhere ahead, people were fleeing toward freedom, needing guidance and protection. I touched the pistol at my waist, a tool now, not a burden, and whispered the truth I'd carried since the ferry crossing. Let them run from us now. I hope you found that story powerful. Leave a like on the video and subscribe so that you do not miss out on the next one. I have handpicked 2 stories for you that are even more powerful. Have a great day.